Here we go. I'm Scuffle. Today we're going to be reviewing the March of the Machine. It's pretty fantastic. It's one of the best sets I've seen in a year. This year. Fantastic set. Everything fits together really nicely. So very briefly, I want to go over the system that I use to rate cards. So it's a little different from other streamers. I rate things on a system of 1 to 10. A 1 is never play me. A 2 is a card you want to try not to play. 3 is filler. You're going to have to run 3s. That's how it is. 4 is above average. It's a strong card. 5 is a very strong card. 6 is a card that you always play in a given color or faction. 7 is a reason to play that color or faction. 8 is a card that you need to make fit. 9 is a card that you always play 100% of the time. And 10 is a card that wins a game. There's very few 10s. They're pretty rare. I do things a little bit differently than other streamers in that rather than give cards an end-all ranking, I give cards a floor, the worst that the card will be, a ceiling, the best the card can be, and then the amount of effort it takes to get there. And whether that is gameplay skill, drafting skill, specific archetypes, deck design, it changes a lot. And modern Magic design tends to not have cards that fit into a strict power ranking. Like, it's really hard to say this card will always be this good. And you see other reviewers starting to reflect this with build around grades or sideboard grades or synergy grades, or even someone mentioned diminishing returns, which I like. This set, as far as I can tell at common and uncommon, has 0 unplayable cards. There's a few exceptions in the artifacts, but for the most part, every card has a place, and that's one of the reasons that this is going to be a little bit more difficult than usual. All right, so I'm going to go through the mechanics first, and we'll talk about the overarching view of the set, and then we'll figure it out from there. So first up, we have battles. So battles are, or first up we have backup. We're going to talk about battles last because they're the most important one. So backup is a relatively simple mechanic. When a creature with backup comes in, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on another creature and then gain all of the abilities past the, not this, you get all of the abilities past the backup. So most of the cards have backup 1, and this Streetwise Negotiator is a great example. You put the counter on something, and then it deals damage equal to its toughness on turn. The thing about backup is that all of the creatures can choose to put the counter on themselves. So Streetwise Negotiator has backup 1. The floor of this card is a 2-mana 3/3 because it assigns creature equal to its toughness rather than its power. So a 2-mana 3/3 turns out is just good. It's good in Magic. It's good in this set, which has an abnormally high power level. And all around, it's a pretty interesting mechanic. Most of the mechanics you can think of are represented. There's flying, there's first strike, there's vigilance, there's haste. We'll run into them, but it's easier to evaluate them individually. There are 16 cards with backup. 4 of them are red, 4 of them are white. That's the backup color pair. 1 card is the red-white signpost uncommon. There's 3 green, 3 black, and there's only 1 blue card, and it is uniquely blue. We'll talk about that a little later. The bodies tend to be very efficient, and that's great in a combat-oriented set. This is a really combat-oriented set. You need to attack, you need to block, and do everything in between. There are a few cards that care about counter synergies in green and white, which is why we will be paying special attention to those in that color combination. Up next, we have Incubate. So, Incubate is a really interesting mechanic. Basically, you make a token, and it's the first transforming token. So, Blighted Burgeoning says when an ETB, Incubate 2, and it's very much a card type we've seen before. It lets a land tap for an additional mana. So, ETB, Incubate 2, and then you can pay 2 to turn your artifact with 2 counters on it into a 2/2. There are 22 cards with Incubate at common or uncommon. There are 2 that incubate for 5, 3 that incubate for 4, 7 that incubate for 3, 11 that incubate for 2. There's only 1 Incubate 1, and there's 1 Incubate X. There's also 1 card that repeatedly incubates, and that's Incubate 2. It's pretty awesome to have transforming tokens, and it changes the rules a little. It is a delayed resource. So if you look at cards like, we just got Shadows over Innistrad, Investigate is a pretty close allegory because you have a 1-mana, like Thraben Investigator is 1-mana 1/2 with Incubate, or with Investigate, and you draw that card later when you have time. And that's kind of the same, it's the same idea. When you have time, you'll flip that Crete token into a real token. The difference is always a creature, and it affects the board right away. So on rate, like there's a card that does exactly this, Blighted Burgeoning in Shadows over Innistrad, called Weirding Wood. Does the same thing, but you investigate instead of incubate. And in general, I think that's fair. And drawing a card is comparable to a 2/2. In this set, you'd much rather have the 2/2 because you need bodies on board all the time. And all around is pretty nice. It's pretty cool. It's a great mechanic. They did have to change some rules, which like my Civilized Scholar combo deck doesn't work anymore, because now tokens that copy other creatures can transform. All right, up next, we have the thing that is most common in this set, and it's battles. And I am covering this up, so I'm gonna scooch a teensy bit. All right, so this is what the original battle is spoiled, Invasion of Zendikar. When a battle comes in, it has health. You give it to your opponent. There's a lot of text, but I think it works more intuitively as a flavor thing. You give it to your opponent. It has 3 toughness, 3 power, 3 counters on it, and then you can attack it like you would a planeswalker, and it dies. And when you defeated the battle, and when you defeat the battle, it comes back. And that does have to be. You do have to defeat it. If you exile the battle, it just goes away. It's a permanent. We're going to be. There's 20 battles at common and uncommon, and another 16 at rare and mythic. There are 2 in every color and 10 total that are sort of signposts for every color pair at just common and uncommon. So that's the 20 common and uncommon battles. The 16 rare and mythic ones are special, and they're easier to talk about when we get to them. All of the common and uncommon ones have 3 to 6 defense, which means there's no 2 defense battles. There's no like play it out, kill it immediately with a 2/2. The 3 to 6 defense, 1 point of defense matters a lot on a battle because there's a lot of cards that will enable 1 attack or deal damage to any target in increments of 2 or 3, and it matters when you can flip them. When I evaluate the battles for this set review, I'll be talking about the front side versus the back side. So Invasion of Zendikar. When Invasion of Zendikar enters the battlefield, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So at its core, this card is Explosive Vegetation. If you ever played Dragons of Tarkir or any like Onslaught, it's been a long time, where Explosive Vegetation was a card, or Circuitous Route in Guilds of Ravnica more recently. 4 mana to get 2 lands is only good when you are ramping, because on turn 5 you get to untap and have 7 mana. So if you have a lot of cards that cost 7 or 8 mana, this front side gets a lot better. So when we evaluate Invasion of Zendikar, we're going to talk about what it ramps us to, what the fixing is, what colors it gets us to, without talking about the backside. And then we'll evaluate the backside separately. Because if you can play Invasion of Zendikar, get 2 lands, and then in the same turn flip this, well, now you have 8 mana on turn 5 in addition to a 4/4 Vigilance creature that will keep battling. It keeps taking out more battles. Battles are integral to this set. They're really important to how things are going to play, and they're fascinating across the board. I love having a new card type. I don't think we've had a new card type. Like, we had tribal sort of counts. Lorwyn, I think, was our last new card type, and that was when we got Planeswalkers. Really cool. I'm so happy with these. They created a new card type that behaves uniquely, and we are going to have to adjust all of our gameplay expectations to that. I'm really happy. You can incubate at instant speed, Ninja. I think it does. I think like, so these are all the battles in the set are siege battles. We might get other styles. Yeah, it's been like 20 years. Equipment before that in Mirrodin, fascinating. Like, we are going to be talking about these a lot because we haven't gotten one in a while. All right, so battle scaling. This is a hard thing to do because nobody's played with these yet. So let's imagine a hypothetical situation. If we have a 2/2 battle, then that is a battle with 2 toughness. Let's say it doesn't do anything. Let's say it gains you life or draws you a card. Something that doesn't directly affect the board for 2. When you play it, you give it to your opponent. They have a 2/2 battle. And then you have a shock or a 1/1. You attack it down. If we assume for a moment that your opponent, because you have a battle deck, they have a 2/2 battle for 2 that flips. They have a 2 mana value, 2 defense battle that flips into a 2/2, and a 4 defense battle that flips into a 4/4, and a 6 defense battle that flips into a 6/6, and an 8 defense battle that flips into an 8/8. Well, let's play it out. So on one turn, I'll attack, let's say they play no creatures. So I'll attack my 2/2 into their battle, and it'll go down to 2 defense because they have 4 defense. And then the next turn, that's after 2 turns, I turn that 4/4 battle into a 4/4, that 4 defense battle into a 4/4 creature. Well, now I have a 2/2 creature and a 4/4 creature that both attack that 6 defense battle. Well, now I have a 6 defense creature, or a 6/6, a 4/4, and a 2/2. And there's an 8 defense battle now. Well, when do we start attacking the opponent instead of the battle? Because if they have 8 defense, well, I can put the 4/4 at my opponent, and then the 6/6 and the 2/2 at that 8 power battle and flip the 8 toughness battle. And let's say they still have a 10/10 battle, a 10 defense, 10/10 battle. If I have an 8/8, a 6/6, a 4/4, and a 2/2, well, where do those creatures go? If I just send them all at my opponent, if they have 0 blockers, that's 20 damage. Well, 8, 14, 18, 20 damage. But if they have 1 removal spell, if they had a shock, if they had a 2/2, if they disrupted the attacks on that battle at any point, well, that changes how things play. If they have vigilant creatures and they played a battle and they're attacking the battle back at me, that changes the rhythm of attacking down these battles, of turning them into creatures. And most battles are worth a creature or a removal spell. They either become a creature, copy a creature, or destroy a creature when they flip. So you have to find your rhythm, because obviously it's not going to be as simple as a 2/2, then a 4/4, then a 6/6, then an 8/8 battle. Some of them flip into 5/5, some of them flip into 8/8s, some of them flip into clones. There's a lot of different kind of battles, and deciding when to attack the opponent or when to attack the battle is a huge part of how this set is going to play. And I'm going to try and help you figure out when to make those swaps. Oh, I missed a Mawile. There is a battle in every single pack. Thank you, Lion. All right, up next, we've got some stats, and give me just 1 sec. Stats. All right, so this is a bigger set than usual. There are 206 cards at common and uncommon. There are 7 sources of fixing. While there's more than that, there's 7 sources of fixing. They're almost all artifact in green, but there's also 10 dual lands. The gain life tap lands have a 50% chance of appearing in each pack in the basic land slot. Plus there's 5 commons with land cycling. So if you haven't played with land cycling before, it's plain cycling, island cycling, mountain cycling, and that you pay 2 mana, discard the card, and go get a basic land. So you'll want one of those in each of your decks to replace a land if you can, just because it is a flip card, like it is both a land or a creature. 121 of those 206 cards are creatures. That is an abnormally high percentage. That includes battles that flip into creatures. There's also 11 non-creature cards that incubate, which means that they effectively are creatures, even if they aren't the most efficient on rate. Because if you're paying 3 mana to play an enchantment that gains you a mana, that then flips into a creature, that's not the most efficient creature, but it does still count. There's 22 creatures with flying, 6 creatures with reach. There's 9 combat tricks, which is a little bit low for a set, and 3 burn spells that go directly to the face, which is a little bit high for a set. For toughness, there's 26 creatures with 1 toughness, 32 creatures with 2 toughness, 29 with 3 toughness, 19 with 4, 11 with 5, 2 with 6, 1 with 7, and there's only 1 with 8, but it has hexproof, so I'm not going to count it for a lot of things. A lot of creatures have power and toughness that change in this set. Not a ton change their toughness, but a lot change their power. A lot of creatures come with additional bodies in the form of incubate. And that butt size, that includes incubates, and it includes, because you don't always incubate for 2. There are cards that incubate for 4, cards that incubate for 5. And it includes battles that are likely to flip. That one was a little bit more subjective, but it doesn't affect the numbers that much. Removal. There are a lot of removal spells in this set, more than usual. There's not as many like weird other spells. The cards are mostly creatures, tricks, and removal for the creatures. There's 2 cards that deal 1 damage or affect 1 toughness creatures. Some of those are color hosers. We'll talk more about the color hosers as we get to them. There are 2 damage removal spells that hits 51% of the creatures in the set, including incubate creatures and flipped battles. There are 5 3 damage removal spells, which does include Vanquish the Weak. Not everybody includes that, but that kills a creature with power 3 or greater, and that's still, it's a little bit less. It's like 72%, I believe. But 75% of the creatures in the set will die to the 5 damage removal spells. There are 2 4 damage removal spells. They're both fantastic. Stoke the Flames is in the set, and that one's really good. That's 93% of the creatures at common or uncommon. Your 4 damage removal spells are effectively kill anything. There are 0 things that deal 5 damage, but there's 2 that deal 6 damage. 1 requires like sacrificing a creature to deal the 6, and 1 just does 6 damage and it convokes. There are 3 cards that just flat kill anything. I believe there's a few more than that, but 3 good kill anythings. There's 1 ring that is an Oblivion Ring. It's the best O-ring I think we've ever had. There is 1 that kills 1 power creature with power 3 or less. That is Vanquish the Weak. There should be less than 4. There's 1 pacifism. There are 3 fight/bite spells, both very strong. There's a good tuck. That's a card that puts a card on the bottom of the library or a few cards down. There's 3 counter spells, and some of them are actually playable. There's 1 quite strong threaten and 4 stuns. All right, before we move to the next part, it's important that I note nearly every card in this set, at common or uncommon, is the very best that card has ever been. The pacifism in this set is the best pacifism we've ever had. The fights and bites are really strong. This is not necessarily a power jump as much as a power standardization. All the cards are pretty good. So a ring is a Oblivion Ring, Flying Ninja. So Oblivion Ring is a 3 mana enchantment that exiles the permanent. When they kill the O-ring, they get it back. But I put 1 ring for myself. We will be addressing that Oblivion Ring today. So, the shape of this set. The shape of your gameplay is a little odd. There's a rhythm. And so in the last set, I talked about how Corrupted was important and you had to fight for different stages of the game as your rhythm. In Neon Dynasty, they had a saga in every pack. It was an important part of the set. And the sagas they'd come in and do a thing, the next turn, do a thing, and that first thing usually impacted the board. Second thing was a little less likely to impact the board. Third thing, flip, and then it would have Summoning Sickness because it would exile and come back in, and then the turn after that it could attack. That is a 4-turn rhythm to what that card does. So after 4 turns, that card can attack. But when your opponent plays it on that first turn, you know what the next 4 turns are going to look like. You can know the rhythm because that third turn it comes in and it can block. That 4th turn it doesn't have Summoning Sickness anymore and it can attack. Well, this whole set is rhythm. So that's because incubators, it's not likely that they'll be able to flip them the turn they come in unless they plan to do that. The battles will come down and you won't necessarily be able to take them out, but you might be able to see your opponent building towards a battle. And then every color has an uncommon 2 or 3 of these transform cards. So in this case, Captive Weird is the example I use. That's a 1 mana 1/3, but you can see your opponent transforming that. And they might transform it on turn 3, but they probably aren't going to transform it until turn 4 when they can try and hit a land drop or a 1 mana spell off of getting that extra card. So normally we would look at these as mana sinks, but when your opponent has a Captive Weird and they play a battle on you on turn 3, then on turn 4, they're very likely to try and flip that completed Conjurer to attack your battle. So you need, over the course of this game, every turn, from your draft to the end of the game, you need to be thinking about what the next turn is going to look like, because you'll usually be able to see the shape of it. Your opponent will have played something that incubates and they'll be spending their turn transforming 2 incubators who can attack. Because the incubate tokens, they don't exile and then come back. They attack the turn they're transformed. So your gameplay, The gameplay in this set is going to be all about finding the rhythm. It's going to be finding the right time to attack the battles. So like if you have a 2/2 flyer, if you have a Windrake out, you would, a lot of the times you would just bash for 2 damage, and that 2 damage, them losing 2 life, that's something that they account for over the course of the game. You account for your life total, you account for not going to 0, but you don't necessarily need to time not taking that 2 damage in the air, not taking that 3 damage in the air. But when you have a battle out, which turns into a 4/4, that 2 damage, suddenly they put a backup counter on it and they bash this. You need to find that rhythm. And finding out the rhythm of how your opponent is playing versus the rhythm of how you're playing will give you little advantages. Just little awkward moments when your opponent has to spend their turn transforming an incubator that they might not want to, or when they have to transform their captive weird a turn early and give up on the extra card, and then they've just paid 5 mana or 4 mana and 3 life for a 3/3. And the cards are so powerful that those marginal advantages from your opponent not getting their extra card or not being able to flip their incubator to leave it back to block, that's where you'll find your wins. It's a weird set. I don't think we've had anything that plays close to like this. Neon Dynasty was close in that so many of the creatures are 2-for-1s. Ninjas were a real risk when you let your guard down, and Transformers were like the Saga rhythm was close. But I don't think we've had anything that plays quite like this. This is going to be a really good set. All right, we are on to the cards. So one moment. Just shifting a little bit so we can see everything. Bounce is gonna be weird, Ninja. We'll talk about bounce in just a moment. Okay, I like that. But the thing, just like normal jazz, being a good musician is all about finding the beat and figuring out what the other person is doing. And then doing your own thing. Well, the difference between this and jazz is you're trying to disrupt the rhythm, not work with it. Okay. So up first, we have Marshal of Zhalfir. This is the Signpost uncommon, and you thought a 2-mana 2/2 Lord was good? Wait until you see a 2-mana 2/2 Lord that taps creatures. So if you're white-blue, you play this card even with no other knights. But if you're white-blue, you're not gonna have any problems getting other knights, because there are 16 knights in the format, and all of them are white and blue. If this card were just a 2-mana 2/2, it would be good enough. But a 2-mana 2/2 with tap is great, and it's not an overly expensive tap. It's just 2 mana. You pretty much have to be white-blue, but if you're white-blue, you will be able to get this card out. So I gave it a 5 with a floor of 4, a ceiling of 6, and an effort value of low. Oh, and just to note, all the cards in this set are good. So if the ratings seem a little lower than usual, I don't usually rate things so in relation to other cards in this set. But that's how it is this time, because the cards are just really good. All right, up next, we have a bounce spell. And let me just make sure this looks all right. Still trying to not overshadow that. So we're gonna slide these over a teensy bit. Yeah, that's a good analysis line. All right, Invasion of Xerix. So bouncing a creature for 4 mana, that's not great on its own. In this battle enables itself. Not entirely, but if you go, lots of times you'll have a 2-mana 2/2, a 3-mana 3/3, and then Invasion of Xerix, and bounce your opponent's blocker. And even if your opponent is expecting a turn 4 battle, if they leave back only 1 blocker, then the invasion will take care of it. Especially, your best case scenario is if your opponent played like an Incubate on turn 2 and then flipped it on turn 3, then this will just delete the creature. Bounce is a little bit better because you can take out Incubate tokens and because tempo is so much important. It's so much more important. That rhythm that we are talking about, tempo is a part of rhythm. So I gave it a floor of 3 with a ceiling of 6 and an average of 4, and I did have to change the templating a little bit. Unlike a lot of the other battles, this one we are not judging on the front side alone. If you're only playing this card for the front side, it's pretty bad, and I'm actually gonna go ahead and lower the floor to a 2, because the floor is gonna be the front side. But it enables itself, and it puts enough power down that it's worth it. Because if you have a turn 2 2/2, a turn 3 3/3, turn 4 Invasion of Xerix, well, you also have a turn 3 3/3 that turns into a 4/4. with flying, and flying is good in this format. Card's solid. It's actually one of the weaker battles, but it's nice that it clears out a blocker for itself. White Blue's archetype is Tempo Knights. It's not just knights. So you'll find that most of the archetypes are not one thing. That's another level of complexity of this set. The archetypes tend to be combinations, and they tend to be combinations that neither thing does on its own. Ooh, there's a Kamala here. All right. Halo Forager. This card is just very efficient. It's a 3-mana 3/1. That is also a Snapcaster Mage, but a 3-mana 3/1 is good for battling. It's good for attacking things down. And the blue-black archetype is sort of evasive graveyards. So like Halo Forager is a flyer that benefits from the graveyard. There's a lot of good instant and sorcery spells even at 1 and 2 mana. There's not a ton at 1 mana, but there's a lot at 2 and 3 mana. So you want to play this card on turn 3 or on turn 5 without a lot of in between. But playing a 3/1 on turn 3 is going to feel really good. Try and resist the urge unless you have a really good removal spell. If you have another 3-drop, play that on turn 3. But try to resist the urge of just not playing a 3-drop to get more value out of this, because there's also ways to get creatures back. There are good ways, there are good little loops with the Halo Forager. It's a great card. I gave it an average of 6. That floor of 4 is just when it's only a flyer. The ceiling is 7 because sometimes you'll get a massive spell, but it's not that hard to get it up to that ceiling. All right, the blue-black battle. Oh, and you'll notice that for the color pairs, I went Signpost Uncommon, Battle. Signpost Uncommon, Battle. Invasion of Amonkhet. The floor of this card is actually a little bit hot. The floor of this card at 3 is when you aren't using any graveyards, and I'm actually raising the floor a little because the worst case scenario of this card is your opponent discards a card, you draw a card, and you both mill 3, which is really just strong for this particular archetype. Blue-black is not the best at actually flipping this battle. So if you can get this to flip, it's really good, and it's worth the effort, but it's not worth just flipping it into a 4/4. You want to give it a little something extra. If you copy a creature with backup, then you can give that backup counter to something else, and it's solid. I don't think it can keep the text. I like this one. It's very efficient on the front and is really strong on the back. So like compared to this one, Invasion of Xerix, it's just better on the front side most of the time, even if it's a little bit weaker on the back side, but you can make it stronger on the back side if you hit some good creatures in the graveyard, and you're very likely to get some good creatures in the graveyard because remember, you put 7 cards into the graveyard with that front side. All right, up next we have Stormclaw Rager. Black-red is sacrifice and artifacts. So there is a good threat in this format, so it's not hard to turn Stormclaw Rager into strict removal. But sacrificing a creature or an incubate token to draw a card for only 1 mana is nuts. This card has a pretty big disparity between the floor and the ceiling. I gave it a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 8, just because you do have to build your deck right. But first pick it, build your deck around it, and it'll win you the game. It's also not really a 3-drop. You want to be able to feed it a few things because there's a lot of deal 2 damage, but a lot of the deal 2 damage also operate at sorcery speed. So if you can play this on turn 5 and eat 2 things with it, you will have drawn 2 cards, and it's more efficient than transforming your incubate token. So if you're incubating 1 a lot, you want a bunch of this card. This is a really good reason to be black-red. Slightly weaker is the Black-Red Saga. Edicts are just a little bit weaker in general because of incubate, but that doesn't mean that this card is bad. It clears its own way a little bit. It's a little bit difficult. This is not as much a turn 2 play as it is a turn 5 play. But if your opponent is, what'll happen a lot of the time is your opponent will attack one of your battles with a 4/4 and they'll have 2 1/1s out. And then you will play this Invasion of Asgul, and your opponent will have to say, well, am I going to sacrifice this 1/1, or do I have to sacrifice my tapped 4/4 that just attacked? And they're gonna have to decide how badly they need to keep you from flipping this, because if you flip it, it does eventually win you the game, although if they kept the 2 1/1s, they can just double block. So this card is a little bit more work, not in terms of how you build your deck, but in terms of how you play your game. So I only gave it an average of 4 because it's going to be incredibly difficult to navigate a lot of board states. There's also a lot more there's going to be a lot of board stalls in this format, and this card does not do a lot for helping you break one. But that 1 life is relevant, and sometimes you will be able to just blow people out. Take it pretty high if you're in best of 3, take it a little bit low if you're in best of 1. It's solid. You also can target yourself, which means that if you threaten a creature, you can attack with that creature and then target yourself with the invasion to sack that creature, which is just a little thing. Targeting matters a lot. All right, up next we have red-green. So red-green's archetype is a little bit ill-defined, but basically it's kill the battles. So red-green is especially efficient at both killing your opponent's battles, well, your battles that you play and give to your opponent, and for for making your opponent deal with it. There's a few ways to make them block, there's a few ways to affect their blocks, and there's a few tricks for breaking through. This card is just hyper efficient. So at its worst, this is a 4 mana 4/4 with trample and haste, or a 4 mana 3/3 that gives something else a counter, or +1/+1. So like it's still 4 power and 4 toughness, but you can divvy it out a little bit, enable different attacks. You might remember this card from Neon Dynasty in the form of Thundering Raijin. It's just good. It's so efficient. So the floor of this card is a 5, and that's if nothing else is happening. Note that you don't have to attack with it to trigger it, which means that if you play the Geoderm and you have a 3/3 or a 5/5 and they have a 6/6 blocker, and you don't want to give up your Geoderm, you can just attack with something else and it'll still get the counter or the +1/+1. Eva, hey, thank you so much for the follow or for the raid. Really appreciate you. We're doing our set review right now, so I'm doing a little bit less, paying a little bit less attention to the chat. And thank you so much for subscribing, King Dark. I really appreciate you. But welcome to the club. I appreciate you being here. I'm Scuffle. Today we are reviewing the most complex draft set I've ever seen. All right, up next, we have the red-green battle. This is the worst battle. It's still quite good. It is a 2 mana battle that lets you rummage, so you can pitch a card and replace it, and also makes a treasure, which means it ramps you to 4 mana on turn 3. That's solid. It's also fixing, and when you flip it, it's a solid little body. It's a 3/4 that fixes your mana as well. 5 defense is a lot, but the card selection on turn 2 is relevant. This is a little bit better in the late game. It's just tough putting 5 damage into your opponent to get a 3/4, and no part of this card generates value. So like, there's all card filtering. It's still playable. You'll still play it in red-green, and giving yourself, red-green cares about attacking battles. So being able to give yourself a battle that, like, this is effectively a 1 mana battle because you can cast it and then play the Ferocidon, the Geoderm in the same turn, even if you only have 5 lands out. So it is more of an enabler. It's a lot more work than the other battles, but if you happen to be the red-green anti-battle deck, or red-green battle deck, I guess, the card's solid. So pay attention to it, but I wouldn't usually first pick it. I'd be really happy to grab it if I already had some Rampaging Geoderms. Right, next we have the green-white Signpost uncommon. Botanical Brawler is a beast. So a 2 mana 2/2 with trample is fine, whatever. But there's a lot of ways to put counters down on things, including backup and incubate. This grows every time you back up or incubate. Very good card. There's not a ton to say about it, it's just very efficient. First pick it, build around it. If you lay this on turn 2 and your opponent doesn't kill it within a few turns, you'll probably win the game. Just so efficient and works really well in this set. Invasion of Mohg. So this is the battle. This is the clearest representation of the Signpost. It's put counters on things. It's a go wide counter strategy, and it's a good one. So Invasion of Mohg, if this just puts, like, you want to get 3 counters on things. But the thing about Invasion of Mohg is if you have 3 2/2s in play and your opponent has 3 2/2s in play, well, now you have 3 3/3s in play and a battle to attack with them. Because a lot of the times these pump your team effects, you can't really use them until you're about to win the game. Like Inspired Charge, you usually play that when it wins you the game. This card just grows your team permanently, and then you can immediately flip it into a 3/3 that grinds the game out further. If you have 3 creatures in play, then this is a 4 mana 3/3 that divvies out 4 counters. Because when it flips, you also get the Bloom Wielder Dryad's trigger on your end step, and it's really hard to kill either of these cards if your opponent is shields down. Because if your opponent only held up 3 mana for a 3 mana burn spell, well, guess what? Your Bloom Wielder Dryads lives and still puts a counter on it. If you suspect your opponent is going to burn something for 3, you just put the counter on the Dryads itself. A 3 mana 3/3 that just grows is good. This is one of the more deceptive battles. It takes a little work to set up. The floor is actually a little lower. You need a lot of bodies, but it's not that hard to get a ton of bodies. It takes some planning. This is a good card to play with and play around. All right, up next we have the white-black Signpost uncommon. The white-black mechanic is Incubate Phyrexians. So this is at its core 6 mana for a 3/3 that grows your team. So it's a little more work, but there's a lot of Phyrexians in the set, especially in white-black, and a lot of cards turn into Phyrexians. It's very good. Yes, Incubate uses the +1/+1 counters. Everything filters together. Hey Troy, hey Hatter. I'm kind of in it. If it takes me a while to respond to you, sorry. That's just how it's gonna be today. All right, so Sculpted Perfection, solid card. This card is good when you get the boost right away. So like you want to play this card after you have a 2-drop Phyrexian and a 3-drop Phyrexian, but an enchantment that grows your team is great. Every Incubate creature is a Phyrexian. They all turn into Phyrexians. So this also pumps all of your Incubate creatures. It's not going to be difficult to make a deck with this card where it grows 100% of your creatures on top of making a 3/3 body. Which is why the effort is a little bit low, but it's gonna play near its floor a lot of the time, which is 4 mana to grow 2 of your creatures, and then on the following turn, make a 3/3. So it's work, but it can be worth it. It's a solid card. White-black battle is one of my favorites. Black rectangles is a good way to think of it, because like there's also lots of things that use the Incubate tokens you make. So Invasion of New Capenna, you might recognize this as a premier card from Midnight Hunt. Sacrifice an artifact or creature and exile an artifact or creature. It's really good. Like that's just solid removal. The floor of this card is a good removal spell. You do have to have the right kind of deck, but it's really easy to have the right kind of deck in white-black. There's a lot of even just creatures that you actively want to die in white and black. And it flips into a reasonable but not that strong equipment. So you usually only want to do it when you've got like a big board. So let's say, when you flip this card, it'll be because you have 8 Phyrexians in play, but only one of them has flying. So if you have a 2/2 flyer and then 6 other Incubate tokens, then you'll attack down Invasion of New Capenna twice, and then use the cannon to actually close the game out. If you have a 2/2 flyer with the Frazzle Cannon, well, now it's a 3/3 flyer, and all your team is bigger, and now it's a 4/4 flyer, and all of your team is bigger, and now it's a 5/5 flyer, and all of your team can now attack through your opponent's board. This set is gonna be a lot of breaking through your opponent's board. All right, 30-second break to drink some water. It's when you create the Incubate token. So it's a little bit awkward line, because some cards say when you put the some cards say when it's put on, and some cards say when it's put on a creature. So it varies a little bit. Oh, Hatter, I'm glad your computer's working. All right, so the blue-red archetype is Convoke. It's cards that, so Convoke's the mechanic. I didn't talk about it at the beginning because it's a little bit more intuitive. Convoke says you can use your creatures to help pay for this spell. So when you make a blue and red elemental token, you can convoke it. You can use that creature to provide a colorless, a blue, or a red mana for a spell with Convoke. And we're going to talk about Stoke the Flames a lot because that is the best Convoke spell. In general, Convoke cards need to be instants, because if you have a card that's Convoke 8 and you have to tap 8 creatures on your turn on your main phase to cast that creature, or more likely 4 mana and 4 creatures, then your shield's down in a format where going shields down is unpredictable at best, because you can go shields down and your opponent, like if you have 40 life, and that would normally, in a normal format, that would be like, I have 40 life, I can tap 8 creatures to convoke something. but then your opponent plays a battle and attacks it. Well, you might have just lost the game as a result of not having blockers. On the other hand, Joyful Storm Sculptor does make 3 bodies for 1 card. So this card is worth first picking to grab a bunch of Convoke cards. But if you have to decide between Joyful Storm Sculptor and a Stoke the Flames, you should take Stoke the Flames. Stoke the Flames kills just about everything. Card's solid all around. It's a lot of work to get going, but I do think it'll be worth that work. So I'm actually raising the ceiling up to a 7. Because if you can get this running in a real Convoke deck with a few battles, there's some Convoke counter spells, there's some Convoke draw spells at instant speed. Like, the Convoke deck's going to be very hard to make and very strong all around. I also love the art on this card. This one's solid. I think it's a great design. I gave it a 4, ceiling of 7, and it's usually going to play at that floor of a 4, but if you have enough Convoke spells, you will take out battles with it. It's one of the only ways to deal damage to multiple battles at once as well. Hey, you might recognize this from my preview image. I'd love to. If you want to post it, Hatter, I'd love to see it. I can't quite look at it right now. Yes, red blue is Convoke. Convoke's a funny thing because like it was green white for the longest time, but I think it really works for red blue because the red blue creatures are more likely to be just charged, full of energy. All right, so Invasion of Kaladesh. This battle looks bad at first, and if you only look at its front side, it is bad. But this is the only battle that creates an evasive threat. So if you play this on turn 2, then it's got Suspend. You have a Thopter that can now attack your Invasion of Kaladesh for the next 4 turns and make a pretty solid Aetherwing. You do have to build around it a little bit, but it'll usually play closer to that ceiling. It's not great on turn 4, but if you build your deck right, you're going to be just fine with it. You'll be able to use that Thopter for using random bodies is what blue-red does really well in this, and having 2 mana sieges is nice. I like Aetherwing Golden Scale Flagship a lot. It is... Are they all legendary? Nope. All right, so this might be the only legendary creature that you get out of a common or uncommon battle, which is too bad because I'd love to have a pile of these. You have to build around this. I'm raising the effort from low to medium. This might be high, but it's worth it. I think it's worth it. There we go. There we go. That looks right. I like this card. All right, Elvish Vatkeeper. This thing's just a monster. Like, it is a 3-mana 3/3 that also makes a 2/2 when it comes in. That's 3 mana that's either a 3-mana 3/3 or a 5-mana 5/5 spread across 2 turns, or an 8-mana 7/7 because of his activated ability. This card, like, it is a late game payoff that doesn't sacrifice anything in the early game. The black-green, it's a black-green signpost uncommon. Black-green incubates and cares about counters. You can get other counters onto your artifact before you flip it. The card's just fantastic, strong all around. It gives you options and without sacrificing any power. So I gave it a 6, which is really high, and you can get it up to that ceiling of an 8 without too much work. All you need is a lot of incubate cards. You really want to paying 5 to turn your 2/2 into a 4/4. I mean, it's solid, but it's not a great rate. So you want more incubate 3 and incubate 4 cards, but black and green have incubate 5s and incubate 4s. Really strong. The stronger signposts. Black and green might be the best color combination. It's going to take some time. The thing is, they're not great at breaking through compared to some of the other color combos, so you're going to lose some battles. You cannot transform it back because it's not an incubator anymore. Once you transform an incubator, it becomes a Phyrexian. You can't flip it back. You can activate this if you happen to have 10 mana, and if your opponent has destroy target artifact, you can respond by activating it again. Not always worth it though. I do think there are enough artifacts to make it good Lion, because there's a lot of ways to make Thopters, but it's a lot of work. I might take this down to a 4, but I like it. There's just not that many artifacts as I thought there were, and I do think it's solid. We might even raise the effort again, but we'll take another look later. All right, up next we've got the black-green. The black-green battle is not indicative of what black-green does, other than that black kills things and green ramps. This is one of the most efficient battles. It's 6 mana, destroy a creature. Like, hopefully your opponent doesn't have a 7/7 on turn 6. But 6 mana kill a creature is fine. The non-elf thing is because it's Invasion of Lorwyn. There's not a lot of elves in the set. I don't know that there are any elves in the set. I need to double check that. But like the only thing that it really can't kill is another Winnowing Forces, which is what it flips into. So this is a 6 mana 6/6 that becomes a 7/7 or an 8/8 if you are willing to deal 5 damage. You're not always going to have time or want to kill this. You are often just going to play this as a removal spell and you won't want to kill it, but it's solid. I guess if you're just playing this as a removal spell, it's a 4. So I'll lower the floor to a 4. But yeah, this will usually get a kill, and then they'll usually kill something and give you the option of attacking through. It's also, I like these battles that enable the attack. So if you already have 5 power, if you're planning around playing this invasion and your opponent attacks you down with all their smaller guys, then you get to kill their biggest thing, hit it right away, and now you've got a solid blocker at 6/6. I didn't rate this card. Oh. Card's just good. Like, it's pretty efficient. You need to build around it. We're giving it a 4 because Vigilance is actually relevant in this set. Vigilance is much better than it's been in a long time. There are enough backup cards that you can get it up there, but you got to build your deck around backup, and you don't always want to do that. I thought about this card. I guess I just didn't write it down. The red-white battle is it's weird. This one's weird because you're not going to use the haste that often. Like, you will occasionally, but you really, if you don't flip this, if you flip this the turn that it comes down, it's really strong. But it doesn't make your attack free. Like, it doesn't give him any form of evasion. If you have 2 creatures out, you'll probably be able to flip this, but they'll need to be reasonably large. But then if you flip this, you're getting 2 3/2s out of it is fantastic. So I gave it a high effort value because you really have to flip it. It's not good enough if you don't. And it takes some work. You have to build your deck right to have 2 creatures in play when you play this, or be able to play a creature on the same turn as this in the late game. But the payoff is pretty high. We're gonna lower that 4 to a 2. The payoff, those 3/2s that both grow, so like that's 2 3/2s that attack into 4 3s. And it does feel, the flavor of this feels like the reward for completing it should give you a little something. There might be some rares that recur battles. And if that's the case, this card gets a lot better because you can, I haven't seen any rares that recur battles, but if there are good ways to recur battles or even just blink battles, and the 2 creatures you get from Valor's Reach Tag Team, then get the bonus from Invasion of Kylum. And now you got 6/4, 6/3 attackers, each of which takes out the invasion on their own, which makes another set of 4/3 attackers. Weird battle. I like this. It shows the diversity in how they play. There is not an elf tribal thing in Green-Black Lion. It's just because Lorwyn had creatures called Winnowers who are specialized in killing ugly things. So the Lorwyn elves often couldn't kill elves. So it's a nice nod to Lorwyn, but I don't think there's any elf tribal. Thanks for the alert, Quebec. Appreciate you. All right, Mutagen Connoisseur. Now this card is deceptively strong. If this is a 2/5 with flying and vigilance, then that's great. It doesn't grow itself, but incubate tokens are transformed permanents. If you transform them to Phyrexians, those count. So blue-green is sort of like an incubate transform thing. Battles are transforming cards. There's a cycle of uncommons. There's 2 or 3 transforming uncommons in every color combination. I think you have 6. You might have only 5 in blue-green. But those transforming cards all counted. A 2/5 attacker that can take out battles but still block effectively to defend against battles. So strong. This card is deceptively powerful. I'm raising this floor a little bit because even if it's an 0/5, it's fine. It's not good, but like, it blocks. And then at 1/5, just taking down your opponent's battles is really strong. This card is way better than it looks in this format, and after looking at everything else. To the Phyrexian's delight, sheer curiosity drove many to willingly surrender to completion. What a cool card. I love this one. All right, up next, we've got the Invasion of Pyrulia, which is a plane we deserve to go to, damn it. All right, so if this draws you, Scry 3 is almost a card. In some situations, so in the late game, I consider Scry 3 to be worth a whole card, sometimes 2. In the early game, it tends to be worth about 2/3 of a card. And the fact that you can play this on turn 2 when you're most likely to need a land, it's solid. It doesn't quite replace your 17th land because it's a it's 2 colors. But if you're exactly blue-green, if you're not running anything else, it works. It'll usually replace itself, and then you get a 4/4 out of it. So the floor of this card is a 3 with a ceiling of 5, but it's usually going to play pretty close to that ceiling, which means a 4/4 with Ward 2. It's hard to flip on the turn after you play this. So if you play this on turn 2, you're probably not going to flip it until the very late game, and then your opponent gets to know about it. But you'll have a lot of situations when you play this on turn 6 and get to flip it right away, in addition to playing another spell. It's solid. It's a good battle. I like the blue-green a lot. It's just flips things. So you ramp, you flip things. Green is also pretty good at just splashing for battles like this. This is a good one. All right, Flywheel Racer. So the card's not spectacular. It's a little bit like a safer version of like the Jaspira Sentinel. It's a mana dork. So what this says is, tap an untapped creature you control, make a mana. But you get to attack with it and then make the mana, and a 3/2 is nothing to sneeze at. It's a reasonable card. It's usually going to be one of the last things you add, and it's a little bit better. It's got weird situations in deck building, because if you have a lot of 1-drops, which there's some pretty good 1-drops in this format, and Flywheel, and a lot of 4-drops, Flywheel Racer is a pretty reasonable way to skip your 3 slot. But it's not like it's always going to make mana, because you can't always afford a creature to turn this into a Springleaf Drum. Springleaf Drum is actually a pretty apt comparison. So like, it's better if you need the fixing, it's better if you've got a strong splash, and it's better if you have 1s and 4s, or you know what you're looking to ramp to. So I gave it a floor of a 4, or of a 2, with an average of 3 and a ceiling of 4. And it's a little bit, it's some work in your deck building. But I think it's going to be worth it a lot of the time, just because you need early creatures, but you're not trying to win fast. You're trying to get on board early. I like this card. So we're on the artifacts now, if you hadn't noticed. Pyrulia, I don't know much about, but it seems to be a little bit like Ikoria, but the monsters have more sentience. Yeah, Vigilance is really good in this set, Lion. All right, up next we have Halehopper. So, pretty, like, it's not great, just because it's going to be, like, if you have 1-drops and you put this down on turn 2, well, it's a 2-mana 3/2. That's not amazing. You gave up an attacker for it. Card's always going to be just fine. You aren't happy to play the Halehopper, but it'll have a place, and sometimes you'll have a few extra tokens to play it for a little bit cheaper. There might be a Convoke ramp deck available when looking at the rares. There hasn't been anything at common or uncommon that make this worth ramping into and then ramping forward, because if you have enough Convoke, maybe it's good enough. We had to take a look at the rares. I don't think it will be, but you'll have to play this sometimes. You just won't be happy about it. Kite Sail. If you don't have flyers, play the Kite Sail. If you don't have flying attackers or flying blockers or a way to close out a game, play the Kite Sail. Ideally, you don't want to have to play the Kite Sail, but sometimes you'll have to play the Kite Sail for evasion or to block flyers, because flyers are a really important part of the set. There's a lot of them, and you'll have to do some aerial combat. It's pretty much the same as it's been in every set. Like, you can't play too many. It's slow, it's clunky, but you'll get there. You'll have a use for it. I love this art for Kite Sail, because it's on Zendikar, and you can see a Flesh Gorger. Or I think that's the Realm Breaker in the background. It's pretty cool. All right, Phyrexian Archivist, not the 6-drop you want to play. Sometimes you will, same as Kite Sail. If you're a more defensive deck, you will have to have some reach cards sometimes, and you will often play a single copy of this card in your blue-black self-mill deck, just in case. Just because sometimes your game goes long and you don't want to have to put the brakes on your early self-mill. And this is a good way to grab it. Like, you can raise dead it in the late game and keep yourself from decking. But even then, you only want one copy of this card, and it'll go pretty late. Don't pick it too high. It's not great. It does have a place, and I like it. The Cogwork Librarian. This is just Cogwork Librarian from Strixhaven, but post completion. And the only difference is that it's a Phyrexian construct instead of a construct. Skittering Surveyor. Sometimes this card is spectacular. It's weak in this set, not because of the other. Play this card when you have splashing to do, because the body is relevant, but it's not great. Creatures are more efficient in this format. It's harder to find places where it trades with the creature than like in Dominaria, and there are other good commons. So, like, you'll have to play this sometimes, and you'll want to play this because like there will be very strong decks where you have maybe green X. So I think that there's a really good green deck in this format where all of your 2-drops are green, your 3-drops are all fixing, and your 4-drops are across all the colors. And Skittering Surveyor enables that. But it's not a high pick. It's not a high priority card. Urn of Godfire. You will have drafts that went horribly wrong where you have to play this card. And I'm sorry. I'm sure I will have to play this card because sometimes the removal just isn't there. And you don't need a ton of removal. You just need a bit. But it doesn't hit a lot of the most important cards. Like, it doesn't hit a battle until after your opponent flips it. And its fixing isn't efficient. If this said 1 mana, add 1 mana of any color, I'd play it a little more often. But yeah, this card's bad. Try not to play it. Recognize when you have to play it, because you'll get this card last pick sometimes. And sometimes you'll have a train wreck of a draft where you don't find your color until halfway through pack 2. And then you'll get a last pick Urn of Godfire, and you'll realize that you got a solid deck together, something that you can play, where you don't get any of the interaction that you need, and you'll have to play this Urn to kill creatures. That's when you play the Urn. All right, up next is all of the tap lands. They're all 4s. You take them when they're in your colors. You take them when they let you splash a color. You have a little more time than like Phyrexia will be 1. But like, you don't necessarily want to take too many off-color ones. It is worth noting there's no like Evolving Wilds or Terramorphic Expanse or Fabled Passage. There's no catch-all filtering that's any good. The Urn of Godfire technically counts. So yeah, all these cards are 4s with a floor of 3, ceiling of 4. They're usually going to play out their ceiling. Take them. You'll take them a little higher than usual because your card quality is so absurdly high that when you're trying to decide between which ridiculous 3/3 you want in a pack, you'll realize suddenly, hey, I'll get one of these 3/3s back. I'll get a 3/3 later that I can play. I'll get a 4-drop later that I can play because all the 4-drops are good. And these are all just good cards. None of them are busted. Then you take the Crag to speculate on opening a rare in the next pack so that you can splash it, or to make your mana just a little more efficient. Alright, that's part 1. That is the shape of the set, plus all of the artifacts, plus all the multicolored cards. I didn't mean to use all green cards. They were just the best examples of backup, incubate, and battles. Okay, hey Kokonon, how's it going? Alright, we're gonna take a 30-second break while I get some water and drink a lot of it and then get more water. If you have any questions about anything you just saw, please ask them, and then we'll cover the white cards. That'll be it for the night. And then tomorrow we'll do the other 4 colors. Be right back. That's okay, Coconut. I'll get it posted tonight. It took me a really long time to parse this set. And, like, I don't think you can get... I think I did the best job on this coverage this time. And I don't say that usually. Yeah, but if you want like stats and such, the beginning is going to be very useful. Removal stats and rhythm. And I'll post it tonight. Might be on the later side, but it'll be up tonight. Good thing, Lion. It's really exciting. You got the important bits, and I'll let you know. I'll post it to Discord as soon as the rest of it is together. There we go. Right, drinking water, and then we'll get to the rest of it. This is pretty much the only content that I produce specifically to be rewatched later. I'll edit it down just a little bit too. Chop some bits out. Yeah, this set's a banger. Hey. White. Oh, sorry. I did read it. So white green is counters. So this is a really good example, actually. Just the very first card we see is Angelic Intervention. So white green cares about putting counters on things, and that means it's incidentally interested in incubate and backup. But it's also pretty good with battles. Like green white is just solid because you win your combats. So Angelic Intervention is our very first white card. Here we go. March of the Machines. White, commons, and uncommons. So up first we have Angelic Intervention. I gave it a 4 with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 5. We've seen this kind of trick before with cards like Feeder Resistance. The protection from a color or colorless is great because there are incubate tokens. Your opponent's gonna have 5/5s occasionally. So being able to grant protection from colorless is relevant. There's so many more modes to this than you'd see at first because cards care about having counters on them. This lets you attack, like you can dodge removal, you can dodge burn, you can win a combat, or you can attack through creatures. Because if your opponent is only incubating, if they've got 4 artifact creatures, you can put your counter on it before you attack, and then they can't block it. You can attack down their battle. Solid trick is not a lot of work. That effort value, I gave it none because like you just want a couple of these in your white deck. You don't need to work too hard for them. And it's a good trick. Tricks get better in sets with a lot of attacking, with a lot of combat. And Angelic Intervention both helps with the combat and protects your creatures from removal actively. It also targets Planeswalkers, which is incidental, but can matter. The only reason not to take this card super high is because there are other options for good combat tricks in this set. Like, this is a good one for sure. Hang on, this isn't the first set card alphabetically. All right, so we won't talk about this later. I don't know why I just alphabetized things slightly incorrectly. But yeah, still a good card. Hang on, a few things got out of order. Let's just get these right. All right, so Aerial Boost is the actual first card. This is a cool card. It's a little bit weaker than the other one, but it's very similar in that it saves you from various spells. It lets you win various combat. And the fact that it has Convoke and instant speed means that even if your opponent is tapped out, if they have a white creature untapped, then you have to play around this card. And if your opponent is getting pauses, on Arena specifically, if there is a pause when your opponent has 2 untapped creatures but no untapped mana, that's how you can tell they have the Aerial Boost. So this card is actually better on or it's worse on Arena than it is in real life, which is cool. Convoke is interesting like that. You can pay attention to that in general. Being able to like suddenly have a flying blocker or a flying attacker, will let you kill battles that your opponent thought were safe. It's a solid trick. I gave it a floor of 3. It's usually going to play near that floor, which is that's where tricks tend to go. If you have a lot of extra creatures, if you're a Convoke deck, the card gets a lot better. Alabaster Host Intercessor. This might be the best white common. It's definitely up there. A 3/4 that takes a creature out as long as it's in play is great. And plane cycling means that you're going to play this card in random decks. So you might remember Sunblade Samurai. Hey Jinxie. Hey Diva. You can play this card if you're a black-red deck, if you're a slower green-blue deck. If you're just green-blue, you can play 3 copies of this card and 1 planes. And any given copy of this card will go get your missing planes. But you will usually be able to play either half of this card, either as a planes or a creature. This card is just very good. A 3/4 body means that it dodges a lot of removal, not all of it, but a lot of it. And 1 backup counter means it dodges most of the removal. Great card all around. You're gonna not just play it in white decks. I guess means I gotta bump the ceiling up a little bit. But taking out a creature and having a relevant body is really valuable in this format. All right, here's that Angelic Intervention, where it's supposed to be. Up next, we have Alabaster Host Sanctifier. 2 mana 2/2 with lifelink is the worst it's ever been because your life totem amount is just a little bit less. It's still very good. Like, you'll play it often. I gave it a floor of 3. It's usually going to play at that floor, but if you have a few ways to grow it, a few equipment, a few cards that pump up Phyrexians, which we know that there are, card's really strong, and having access to it in the more aggressive matchups is great. Just a solid filler. Don't pick it too high. Play it when you're in white. Attentive Skywarden. I love this card. So this is Windrake with upside. I like that it triggers on dealing with battles. It's usually going to play near... I'm actually lowering the little bit to a 2. But if you're transforming, you can play this on turn 3, turn 4, incubate, flip it. I'm actually lowering the ceiling a little bit too. Which means the effort has to come down. So I'm just rethinking this card after thinking more about incubation. So it'll usually play near that ceiling in that you are incubating turn 4, turn 5, or you had it incubated on turn 2, and it triggers on hitting battles too. So it's nice being able to attack a battle down and still growing you get to grow your team as well, increase your board presence. Good form of Windrake. It's not terrible, but a 3 is also not a bad rating. Oh, thanks, Crystal. I shall hydrate. Here's a great example of backup and how backup plays. So, your worst case scenario is a 4 mana 3/3 that taps a creature down whenever it attacks. We saw something similar in Fiendbinder. It's a little awkward because it doesn't have as much of a place in a lot of decks. It's not a knight, it's not a Phyrexian. So it is best in the green-white counters deck because putting a counter on a creature tends to be strong there. It does enable attacking down some battles. So I might actually end up lowering the floor to a 3, but I like it at 4 for now because when this card is good, it's going to feel phenomenal. It's going to feel like you win the game because you get the effect the turn it comes down and you get to keep tapping down blockers in a set where it's really relevant. You're not going to want it against the decks that create a lot of creatures. And it's not the best at breaking a board stall, but it tends to combo with a lot of things that grant flying or make it bigger or have tricks. Solid card. I like it a lot. It's a little awkward. I'm going to lower the floor. I'm going to lower its score. Because it's good, but it's not like game breaking. I think it's going to play as filler a little more often than not. Because a 4 mana 3/3 is solid, but it interferes with where you want to play a lot of your battles in green and white. And that's after I looked at all the battles. Like, I gave it a higher score before because attacking down the battles felt so valuable, but it's harder to attack down the battles with this card than I thought. I now realize that. All right, up next we have Cut Short. Just a solid removal spell. Being instant speed is great. And taking out Planeswalkers is nice. It's not the best removal. I'm lowering the floor to a 3 because it doesn't take out a blocker. But it's nice being able to kill a creature without having any untapped mana. It's solid. Elspeth Smite. 1 mana, deal 3 damage. Great. Is one of the better versions of this effect we've seen in a while. And we know what percentage the 3 damage kills 75% of the creatures in this format. So it kills 3/4 of creatures for 1 mana and exiles them, which is relevant to a lot of the black cards. Just solid. Also, love the art here. Like, this is a moment. you can see it. Solid removal, not quite lightning bolt, but still quite strong. All right, Enduring Bound Warden. This card's a little bit awkward. It's good in weird niche situations. It's a 1 mana 1/2 at its fail case. It is nice being able to put it down on something and force a block. So like, you can put some effort into crafting a situation where this card is good, but it's hard to make this worth a whole card unless you have uncommons or cards that put counters on your whole team, which there are. There are cards that put +1/+1 counters on your whole team. If you have those, this card is solid. If you don't play it. There are also reasons to care about having 1-drops. So if you have those, then the card's solid. Golden Scale Aeronaut. It's an interesting card. It's a 5 mana, 3/4 flying, and you grant something flying the turn it comes into play. Just not very efficient. Gave it a low score. Sometimes you'll need to play it because you need flyers, and sometimes you'll need to play it because you need flying attackers. And there are counter decks where this card's pretty good. But there's better 5-drops in the format. It's competing with some really good 5s, including battles. It enables attacks, but it doesn't do all that much. There's not too much to say. I gave it a floor of 2. It's usually going to play near that floor of 2. The ceiling is a 4, and I remember first picking 5 mana 3/4 flyers 10 years ago. Infected Effector, just really good. It's a 5 mana 4/3 that, when this dies, you will likely be able to incubate it, and you will often be able to incubate it in the same turn. So you'll have a 5 mana 4/3 that blocks their 4/4, and then you'll be able to incubate it on turn 6. But even if you play it on turn 5 and it has to block that same turn, you're fine getting a 3/3 on the next turn. All right, Inspired Charge. Gave it a floor of 2, ceiling of 5. When it's good, it's really good. There's just better versions of this card, so we're dropping the ceiling a little bit. You don't usually want to play this card. You'll know when you need this card, and you'll need it quite badly. But it's often just going to be filler. You're more likely to have opportunities to trap your opponent with this card than in other formats. So like, there's more likely to be opponents planning around a big attack, and you're more likely to be planning around a big attack that your opponent hasn't been disrupting as much. So Inspired Charge is actually a little better in this format than it has been in others, but it's still not that strong. All right, up next we have Invasion of Belenon. This is not a plane I've seen before. It is really cool. Yeah, I like the art a lot in this set. Hey, Jameshio. All right, Invasion of Belenon. This is one of the battles that you're not very likely to attack. So I gave it a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 6 with an average of 5. But the option is really nice. So having a 3 mana 2/2 white and blue knight with vigilance is relevant because vigilance is solid in the set and knights are relevant to white. Making knights is really strong. Being able to turn this into a Glorious Anthem when you need to is solid, and it enables a few turns. So the rhythm of this card is you'll play a 2/2 on turn 3, and then maybe turn 5 or turn 6, you will play something like an Inspired Charge and send a few creatures towards the Invasion of Belenon. It's just awkward because, like, how much power do you have to get out of dealing 5 damage for this to be worth flipping? But it's a reasonable 2/2, and you're usually going to be pretty happy to play it. I am actually lowering the score to a 4. Just because being a 2/2 is not that strong. I went through the white cards pretty quick. Alright, and then up next we have Invasion of Dominaria. It's good, it replaces itself, and it flips into a 4/4 with flying and vigilance, which I have since come up on. So we're just going to go ahead and swap these two battles. The front side replacing itself is nice. The 4 life is helpful. It lets you recover a little bit in the late game. And this card, you're more likely to want to attack. Because this battle, when you attack it, you're going to want to attack it because you have a lot of creatures in play. And if you have a lot of creatures in play, you're probably trying to set up a different kill on your opponent. Both of these benefit from having like a Windrake, just a 2/2 flyer, plinking them down. But they're also both 5 defense, which is a lot. Like, that's 5 damage you're not dealing to your opponent. in order to get that creature. Up next, Kithkin Billy Rider is usually going to be at that floor of a 2, but there are enough cards that pump Knights that it plays closer to the ceiling of a 5 more often. I gave it medium effort value because you want it most in a Knight deck or in a deck with lots of pump spells. There are enough pump spells that you can build this pretty well. And the 3 mana 2/3 is where it's going to play a lot of the time. That's why we gave it a 3. But being able to pump it, being able to grow it, there's like some good equipment, makes this card much stronger. So if you first pick a rare equipment or a battle that grows your team, then this card goes up a lot. A new coalition. That would be nice, Night Dark. It is nice that it replaces itself at least. All right, 4 mana for 4. This is, at worst, a 4 mana 4/4 with Vigilance. But there's a lot of cards that care about bodies in play, number of bodies. There's a lot of cards in white that care about having multiple creatures out or putting multiple Knights out in one turn. If you have the white-blue Night Lord, then this is a 4 mana 6/6. Card's just good, very efficient, and this is the 4-drop you're looking for in white a lot of the time. It gets better if you are the Knight deck, but you're still just fine playing this. There's also ways to blink creatures in this set and ways to recur creatures in this set, and the Knight benefits from all of those. It's a good card. I gave it a floor of 3, which is if you have no other interaction or if your opponent has a 3/3 out, but it's usually going to play closer to that ceiling of 4. Take it pretty high if you're white. For Halberd, fine equipment. It's just awkward because it's got to compete with some good stuff. But Vigilance is really strong, and being able to throw an equipment around for 1 mana is pretty good. So I like this card a lot. I'll usually play 1 or 2 copies if I don't have a lot of other pump spells. A good equipment. Norin's Inquisitor. This card's a beating. It is a Lord of sorts. Anytime you incubate, or any of the cards that we'll talk about soon that transform that aren't incubators, getting that counter is relevant. But a 2 mana 1/1 that makes it is a 4 mana 4/4 spread out over 2 turns. Because this is your 2-drop and your 3-drop, because you can play this on turn 2 to make a 1/1 that incubates 2 and then transform it the very next turn to be a 3/3. Card is just good. It's really efficiently statted in addition to being a reason to be the incubate deck. Phyrexian Awakening. So 3 mana, Vigilance is good here. Giving your whole team Vigilance is really nice. This does do something the turn you play it down, because you can play this on turn whatever, and attack with your team. You can also play this on turn 5 as a 5 mana 4/4 with Vigilance that gives everything else Vigilance. Or you can play it on turn 3 and then on turn 4 play another 2-drop and transform your incubator. You're really incentivized to flip that incubate token as quickly as possible, but there's also a lot of situations where you can flip it right away because there's a lot of white cards that say transform target incubate token. Really good, efficient reason to be the incubate deck. It's also incubate 4 is a lot of beating. I think one of the reasons it had to be Azorius Knight's Night Dark is so that they didn't give soldiers any extra tools for standard. But eventually, I think that will be the case. I think once Brothers War rotates, then Knights will replace soldiers. Up next, Phyrexian Censor. This seems solid, but there's so many Phyrexian spells in the set that it ends up being a 3 mana 3/3 most of the time. You'll get a little bit of upside occasionally, but a 3 mana 3/3 that your opponent things come into play tapped is solid. I'm actually raising the ceiling a little because if you really do have all Phyrexians, you'll win some games off of your opponent's things coming in tap. But this is mostly a constructed card. It's still efficient. Like, you play this card. It's like the Furnace card in the last set. The 3 mana 3/3 that they dealt 2 damage if they didn't have 2 basic lands. Furnace Mentor, maybe. It's like that. Like, you don't take this over 3 drops that are on plan. But it's a 3 mana 3/3 is fine. It's good enough. And there's a little bit of upside on it. Phyrexian Pegasus, I'm lowering the floor on this because a lot of the time your opponent just blocks. There's more 3/3 flyers in the set than I thought. If your opponent has a 3/3 flyer, then this enables 1 attack for something else, and there are better Windrakes as well. But it's solid. You'll use it to break through. Windrakes are good in this set. Realmbreaker's Grasp. Efficient, strong removal. There's not a lot of work. It's not the safest removal because there are still cards. There's a lot of cards that just have passive effects. or are they did their thing already. They already made the incubate token when they came into play, where they already powered something up. So this is a little bit weaker than would be in other sets, but it's still the best pacifism we have. And it's still worth playing. It's a good card. Scroll Shift is one of the reasons that Realm Breaker's Grasp isn't higher. There's a lot of little reasons, but every color has a few reasons. This is actually solid because there are so many things your opponent wants to kill that you get to save, or free from a pacifism, or regain that enter the battlefield effect, or make another 2/2 knight, and you draw a card. You are limited on the room for tricks you have, but this also untaps a creature at instant speed. So sometimes this will just be untap target creature, draw a card, and you'll get a block that you wouldn't have otherwise, both preventing your opponent from flipping a battle, and it both prevents your opponent from flipping a battle and kills a creature, or you can exile a battle and give it back to your opponent and get the enter the battlefield effect again from the battle. So there's a lot of utility to this card that's not free. You have to work with it a little bit, but there's enough good enter the battlefield effects, enough battles, there's battles in every color, and enough tricks you can do with Scroll Shift. I actually really like this card, and I think it'll play pretty well. Also, just cool. The only weapon she'd never run out of. Lecture notes. Okay. Steal from Existence. So this is Oblivion Ring, but better. Ward 3 on this card is really good because the downside, the disadvantage to exile target creature until this card leaves the, non-land permanent until it leaves the battlefield, is that when you attack with your 4/4, if you had an O-ring on their 5/5, they can kill it at instant speed, take their creature back, and block, and they get to 2 for 1 you, and that's a risk you have to accept when you play with these cards. Well, Ward 3 severely mitigates, it really mitigates that risk. It's not as much of a problem, it's a much lower effort. Best we've seen this card. It's possible that it's supposed to be higher than a 6. The only reason it's not is because 1-for-1 removal is a little bit weaker when every card makes 2 bodies or 2 cards, which a lot of the cards make multiple cards. Seed Pod Caretaker. Just good. You will always get at least 3 power out of this card. It's always going to be at least a 3/3 for 3. Because if it's a 2/2 that puts another counter on, you'll enable attack. If it transforms an incubator, you're only doing that because you're getting more than 1 power. Or you need an extra body. Efficient, flexible, great card. I like this card. So I gave it a 4 because it's just better than a 3-mana 3/3. And with the ceiling of 5, because it's not that much better than a 3/3 for 3. Seraph of New Capenna. So this is our first transforming card, besides the incubate token. So I'll be doing it like this. I just gave them different slides so we can talk about it a little more easily. But you know, the ratings are the same. So 3-mana 2/2 Windrake. Earlier when I said we just have better Windrakes, this is the card I was talking about. If you pay 3 mana for this to make a 2/2 flyer, then untap and on turn 4 make it into a 3/3 flyer and pay 2 life, it's not the best, but the options are nice. And having the Windrake is good, and attacking as a 5/4 is good, especially when you care about sacrificing some things. And you do need to find some things to sacrifice. You have to. It's not a free card to play with, but it's solid all around. So I gave it a 4. That 4 of a 3, that's a Windrake. You don't always want to play it when it's a Windrake. And you're not always going to want to pay the 2 life to transform it, but I like it. I'll pick it pretty often, just not that high. Alright, Sigil Sentinel. Yes, I gave a 3-mana 3/3 Vigilance a higher rating than this transforming Seraph of New Capenna. 3-mana 3/3 Vigilance, really good in this format. Being able to give something else Vigilance to enable an attack it didn't have, really good in this format. So like your fail case on this card is a 3-mana 3/3. Your success case is you enabled a 2/2 to attack, and this is going to just be a relevant body for the rest of the game. This is one of White's better 3-drops. I'll take it over Windrake quite often and not be sorry about it. Just very efficient. Excuse me. Alright, our next transforming card. White-Black is a weird sack archetype. It's hard to generate. White-Black is more about generating the things to sacrifice. So Black-Red, you have to pick your sack outlets first. Black-White, you have to pick your things you're sacrificing first. You have to find ways to make bodies before you find things to feed those bodies to. Sunblessed Guardian. It's a 2-mana 2/2 that turns into a 3/3 that attacks as a 6/6. So like it's pretty good. A 2-mana 2/2 with late game upside is great. The +1/+1 counter thing is kind of gravy. It's a lot of work to make those +1/+1 counters relevant, but doubling the effectiveness of each +1/+1 counter is pretty good. So it's usually going to play near that floor of a 4, which is a 2-mana 2/2, which when you need it, you'll really need it. And your opponent will have to deal with it before it becomes a very difficult to block attacker that attacks down on their battles. Is a lot of work to get it up to that ceiling of 5, just because it's a lot of counters. But being able to transform this on turn 5 to attack a battle for 6 damage is pretty good. Maybe I need to up the rating on this, but it doesn't feel like quite like a 5, because it's not something like I'll first pick via white aggressive deck, because it takes 7 mana to make a 6/6 attacker, even if it's spread out. 7 mana and 2 life. Thunder the Gateway. All right, Disenchant is really good in this format. Not hitting incubate tokens is pretty relevant, but hitting even like your opponent's, hang on, where is it? The incubate 4 card we looked at, this one. So if you hit your opponent's Phyrexian Awakening, they already got to incubate 4, but you get to incubate 2. So this ends up being like a 2-mana 2/2 that kills an artifact or an enchantment, or rather a 4-mana 2/2 because you're not quite incubating. But you can just play this card if your opponent doesn't have any targets as a 2-mana 2/2, and you'll have niche situations where you play it as a 2-mana 2/2, like you incubate 2 and then flip your 4/4. But generally, this is going to be either Disenchant, incubate 2, or make a 2/2, and the options on that are fantastic. I really like this card. I'll be taking it pretty high because there are some scary enchantments that you need to hit in this format, and having the option of being a 2-mana 2/2 on it, it's like the same way of a Reclamation or Thrashing, the 3-mana 3/4 that disenchants. You can sacrifice it. There's a lot of good reasons to play Thunder the Gateway. I like this card. Surge of Salvation. So here we have our very first. Hey Ethan, how's it going? We're doing a set review. We're almost done for the day. So Surge of Salvation is our first color hoser, and it said prevent all damage that black and or red sources would deal to creatures you control this turn. So your fail case on this card is you and your permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. Counter target spell that targets you or a permanent you control. Really solid, but not like something you play that high. It's not something you necessarily play over that Convoke Pump spell or that give a creature a +1/+1 counter and protection from a color of your choice. But if your opponent is on a black or red deck, and this goes up to a 4 because you get to fog, kill all of their creatures, you have to not be black or red also. Not necessarily, because it's just creatures you control. You will have situations where your opponent is a black-red sack deck, and you are... This is a set where you're more likely going to both have 4 creatures crashing into each other more often, because you got to build up those battle attacks. And if you get a Surge of Salvation on your opponent, like, there will be situations where your opponent attacks with 6 creatures, and you block with 6 creatures, and you have to double block, because a lot of the black-red creatures have Menace, and they kill one, and you get to respawn with a Surge of Salvation. You win the game. You just... Wrath one-sidedly. You kill all of their creatures, you don't take any damage, and you counter their removal spell. Like, you can play this like Veil of Summer. Not always. Just, it's work. It's a lot of work to set up those situations, but the payoff is there, and you're not that upset about running this card otherwise. Like, as often it's going to be a sideboard card. I'm going to put the floor on it too. But, like, it's reasonable protection most of the time. You play this card when you have creatures to protect. Creatures worth protecting. Thorn Cavalier. Good in the night deck. 2-mana 3/1 first strike is great. 2-mana 3/1 without first strike is playable. It's not great. But there's enough knights in this set that it's not that hard to enable the knight synergies. I'm going to drop the floor to a 2 because you do need to have the knight synergies. But yeah, it's a good card. This is efficient 3/1 knights. They're better options, but you'll have to play it some of the time and you won't be too upset about it. And it's great in the night deck. Tarkir Duneshaper. 5 mana 4/3 just isn't quite worth it. 6 mana 4/3 or 5 mana 4/3 pay 2 life. Same as the other, that creature with backup from a while ago. You'll play it when you have a reason to have 1-drops. You'll play it when you have creatures that care about other things transforming, or tribal things for Phyrexians, but on its own, it's not worth it. Oops. There we go. Pillar of Flesh. I think this is the best white uncommon. It's a little bit of work, but the things you the spells in white are good. The combat tricks are strong. This is also the only repeatable source of incubate at common or uncommon, and it's a good one. A 4-mana 2/4 is not the best body, but it's a knight and it's a Phyrexian. Those are both relevant creature types. Having 4 toughness means it survives all the myriad of 3 damage burn spells. And it's gonna generate, if you get 1 incubate off of this, it's strong. It's also not hard to just wait until turn 6 and hold up mana to protect it with a white common protection spell, and then if your opponent doesn't play a removal spell, you can flip your incubate, and then you can do that for the rest of the game. You just hold up mana, protect your creature, and anytime they don't play something that targets it, you flip an incubate token and keep adding power to the board. Card is a build around, and it's a fantastic one. I gave it a floor of 3 because you do have to build around it, but it's not that hard to build around it in this set. Also, it's gross. Tiller of Flesh, like really cool monstrous design. All right, Talfin Lancer. Really a 3-mana 3/3. We talked a lot about how 3-mana 3/3 is just good enough here. And gaining +1/+1 in Vigilance for every knight means that it attacks as a 4/4 with Vigilance on turn 4, and then it probably every turn for the rest of the game. Really strong, really efficient knight payoff. It's gonna be worth taking early and then grabbing knights the rest of the draft. I gave it a floor of 4. It's almost always going to be at least that good, and it's not that hard to get it up to its ceiling of a 6, but you do need a lot of knights. Could probably up this to a 5. Yeah, we're gonna call it a 5. All right, that's it. That's all we got for today. Does anybody have any questions? I know that was a lot and it was very dense. I feel like I did that all in one breath. All right, so that was our set review for the day. I'm gonna get this edited down just a little bit and uploaded as soon as possible. It'll be just in a couple hours. Thanks, Night Dark. This one took me a long time, but I'm pretty confident in this one because I revised this 4 times. I went through and revised, like this was the 5th revision that we just did in real time. Because it's so dense and everything changes so much with the rest of the cards. Like, this is a tough set. If you draft this and feel lost, don't worry. Everybody else is feeling lost too. This is new for everyone, and we're gonna have to figure it out together. Pretty excited for that, honestly. It's really good. I think that I'm closer than a lot of people I've seen, but I don't feel like I'm there. I don't feel like I understand this set fully. But we'll figure it out. I feel like I will. And I'm really excited. If you...